Hello and welcome to PhDtalk. My name is Miriam and I'm the host on this podcast where I interview PhD students to let them talk about their topics and struggles and joys, and where me and others share tips with you to make your life as a PhD student more effective, less stressful, and most importantly, more fun. For today's episode, I interviewed Karolina Enquist Källgren. She is an associate professor at Stockholm University studying the history of ideas. Today we're talking about a project or idea very close to her heart, and that is summer universities. She herself is the chair of the Nordic Summer University. We talk about the importance of summer universities or the influence of summer universities on science, on the development of research, the development of new research fields and study fields. If you are yourself looking for a place to have interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary discussions with not just scientists in fields that are very different from yours, but also with activists and artists and people from any field or any career and background, then maybe summer universities might be a place for you to visit. I myself took part in the Nordic Summer University this summer in 2024, and this is also where I met Karolina and where we did this interview together, and I thought it was really an inspiring place. My horizon definitely grew through the interaction with people from very much outside of my own bubble, and I think you can get some of the enthusiasm around this from listening to this episode. It is really inspiring, I think, how Karolina explains or talks about the history of summer universities and their influence on science. Then I wish you fun listening to this episode, listening to stories about Einstein, Spanish philosophers, and very much, many things. And then let's talk science. Hi, Karolina.
Hi, Miriam.
Nice to see you and nice to have you as my guest today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So we are at the Nordic Summer University together at the moment in Denmark, and this is also what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
And how this could be relevant for PhDs or interesting for PhDs. But let's start with an introduction of yourself. Like, who are you?
Okay.
And please.
Yeah, my name is Karolina Enquist Källgren, and I'm on my regular work day. I'm an associate professor of the history of ideas at Stockholm University, and I am also the chair of this Nordic Summer University. When I was a PhD, I started coming here, so it's like intrinsically connected to what I have done in order to become an associate professor, let's say.
Yeah.
Even though it's somewhat outside of the normal university path. I defended my doctoral thesis in 2015, and now I have an okay academic career.
Yeah.
Let's say.
I think so.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I mean, it's, I did my doctoral thesis on a Spanish philosopher called Maria Zambrano, and her notion of subjectivity and her experiences in the Spanish Civil War and subsequent exile. And after that, I had a postdoc in another place where I studied the relationship between theology and quantum physics between 1925 and 1935, which somehow led me into a track that I'm researching now, which is the impact of European summer universities on the development of science after the war, let's say, and also a bit before the war. What's really interesting with this is that these kind of alternative organizations have hardly been studied at all. And they're actually not that well known in Europe. So if you go, you know how to go on an Erasmus, you know maybe how to, do an extra year at Berkeley or whatever, but you don't know about this long-standing tradition of alternative summer universities that have been really influential, not the least for the development of science in the Nordic countries. I think that both in the practices that we are working on now in this organization, but also research-wise, it's a really interesting topic to see how institutions outside of academia have influenced academia Because normally when we speak about that, we think about companies, for example, and we might be critical of companies deciding what we want to study, or we think about think tanks and lobby groups, and we might be, or parties even, and we might be critical about them influencing what we want to study. These alternative summer universities have been organizations that have let students and professors and activists and artists meet and develop new research fields. So they cannot easily be, classified as either a lobby group or a think tank, yet self-standing and different from the university. So I think that's a really important issue and also really interesting as a topic of study.
Yeah. Could you describe this, the idea behind this alternative universities and how they came about?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first self-standing democratically organized summer universities were organized in the time between World War I and World War II. And there are some famous summer universities. You have the Summer University in Davos. And I don't know if some of you who are listening comes from philosophy, then you might have heard about this really important debate between Ernst Cassirer and Heidegger, which took place in Davos, which is often depicted as like the failure of the old German university and the revolutionary philosophy of Heidegger and a new generation. And it has been used to explain the development of, for example, philosophy in America and so on. But this was, in fact, much more interesting than that because it was locally organized. It was organized by the municipality in Davos. Davos was like a small town that had lots of people coming to their sanatories. So they had a huge group of fairly young people who were staying for a very long time and being treated mainly for tuberculosis.
Yeah.
So they wanted to have some kind of entertainment and also see to it that these people would not lose out on their education. So the municipality decided, together with the main medical doctor at the sanatorium, to start this summer university and invite all of these profiled philosophers and scientists to come and debate.
Okay, so that was the original idea, actually bringing some knowledge to those patients.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But the good thing with this then was, or the interesting thing is that those who were inviting were the locally elected municipal authority. Mm-hmm. And they did so in collaboration with a man not so well known, but who was called Gottfried Salomon. And he was a French-German sociologist who had a really strong idea that after World War I, there had to be a re-established collaboration between France and Germany. So he believed that doing this in Davos would also lead to like a long-lasting peace, which proved not to be true. But he had this idea. So the main ideas here was to have like new takes on science by inviting a group of different kinds of scientists, high profile, have them teach the students and have them debate with the students as equals and without the kind of hierarchies of normal universities. And also that this kind of international debating would lead to peace. Mm-hmm. There were several large ideas connected. And this then spread. So there was another summer university, or two different in Spain, one in Santander and one in Catalonia. And then there was one established in 1945 in Austria, more or less based on the same ideas, even though in 1945 they were also really keen to have this kind of anti-hierarchical system because they were trying to get away from the Austrian university, which had been dominated by Nazis during the Second World War. So basically they were established in 1945 and Nordic Summer University was established in 1950 after direct contact with this Austrian university. And the basic ideas that they shared was the idea that international collaboration would provide peace, would also provide a kind of safeguard against national policies or against national politics, so that politics would not determine science, and multidisciplinarity would save science from disciplinary dogma, so that high professors wouldn't be controlling what could be said within each discipline. And also the idea that this kind of anti-hierarchical, open or flat organization where students and professors, people from the outside, bypassers, activists, artists would be involved also would lead to a space where completely new ideas could be developed, and without the kind of threat of authoritarianism. So they really came with a strong idea about like safeguarding science. And I think today that's more necessary than ever, or at least equally necessary as it was then. To find these spaces where we can work together and experiment to develop new research fields. And that's also the purpose of the Nordic Summer University.
Okay. So also the difference between the summer universities and the conference. I guess conference are often very topic specific, like then people of their field meet, and it's also, of course, relevant and important, but it's not so much spreading ideas and maybe getting another view on my topic from someone who studies something completely different. And also this contact with artists, as you said, that are not usually to find on scientific conferences.
No, exactly. In these early summer universities, the idea was that you had to have some kind of cultural influence on your thinking, because that would kind of open doors that would remain unlocked. Otherwise, you would have new ideas or lead to new ideas. So they organized excursions. They walked in the hills, for example, because they believed that this walking together and speaking together would lead to, new meeting each other over the disciplinary boundaries. And they also organized science differently than from we do today. So NSU, for example, as it is today, it's multidisciplinary in the sense that we are organized in several study circles that run for 3 years, and each study circle has to have a project that includes several different disciplines.
Could you give an example?
Yeah, for example, we have now one study circle which treats different ways of thinking about the future. So futures, the science of future studies, and they have musicians, they have engineers, they have artists, they have lawyers, they have sociologists, and together they present. And sometimes their presentations, of course, are quite different. But in the debates that emerge from these very different presentations, there is some kind of core that remains. That's kind of crystallizes as what they are investigating. So that's one example.
Okay.
And in the other summer universities, they tried somewhat different ways of organizing science. The Santander Summer University, for example, they organized research in fundamental and applied science, but those groups did not correspond to anything we would think about it today. So they had physics, theology, and philosophy in fundamental sciences. They also had language studies, and then they had sociology, economy, what we would maybe see as more empirical research today in the applied sciences. So they didn't differentiate between natural science and humanities. They differentiated between fundamental science and applied science, which I think is like just thinking about that opens up new ways of thinking about what we do.
Yeah, true. Just grouping them differently. Yeah. Because now I think there is really this hard science, soft science sometimes. And yeah.
What's also interesting with this, and this is part of what I'm researching now, is that if we dig a bit deeper in what they are, how did they work together? What happens when you put these people in the same room or in the same walk in the hills? And I have been able to at least partially follow that from reading minutes from their encounters, not from the walks, obviously, but from there. And many of these places also have published lectures. And from Davos, there is actually an entire archive of the daily journal that was published in Davos. It was published in at least three languages, English, German, and French, and also sometimes in Romanian. And they gave daily updates on what was happening in the summer university to the greater public. So you can get quite a good idea of what was happening and who said who and so on. What you can see is that they posed problems, like fundamental problems, and then they used different kinds of, I call it model thinking. That is that they took away the disciplinary specific concepts, or they did the work of trying to express what they were thinking about these problems without being too specifically disciplinary. And then they somehow moved around these problems until they were capable of having like the same language. And it could sometimes be a very specific language. For example, the physics, they could have like a mathematical formula that expressed their problem. But then when they had to somehow explain with words what this meant, meeting the philosophers or the theologians, they had to generalize in such a way that with language so that it could be comprehensible. And then I can see literally in this archive material how the theologians and philosophers answer. And they answer by translating. So they say, aha, but this problem, this physical problem, it's exactly the same as this philosophical problem that we've been thinking about in relationship to maybe God or something else. Mm-hmm. And then you can see how they kind of use the different subsidiary meanings in the different languages that they have to try to engage with this common problem. Mm. And that is really, really, really interesting. And I've been thinking a lot about what are the necessary conditions to have that kind of conversation, because it's obvious that in our day-to-day as researchers, we don't have that kind of conversations. No. Mm. It takes effort, it takes time, and it takes a certain kind of space, I think, and also a will, of course, to do so. Yeah, right. But NSU is, at least as long as I'm the chair, NSU, I wanted to be this space for exploration that offers precisely this space, no?
And how did you get to join NSU when you were a PhD? What was your...
Well, the first time I came to NSU, it was because I saw a call, just like maybe you did.
Yeah.
I had distant friends who were also going. So okay. I thought, yeah, I'll join this. And it's really an experience because it's so different from going to a normal conference. This was in my first year as a PhD. So I just started doing a PhD. And when you have just started doing a PhD, at least if you do it in the humanities as I did, where you do it with your own project and not within somebody else's project, you feel kind of lost. Mm-hmm. Like you don't really know what you're doing or what you're supposed to be doing. And you also may feel pressured to be this kind of very intelligent person that they have thought you were when they hired you. So coming to NSU was maybe not a lifesaver, but certainly a place where you could grow your confidence. Actually, I started in a circle and I took part in that circle, and I think I understood hardly anything. what was happening? Yeah, what was happening? Yeah. Maybe because I also didn't have my own expertise. That's also interesting, thinking about this larger discussion on this kind of speculative science, that where you develop your research fields, that it's difficult to contribute to that if you do not sit steadily in your own expertise. And the next time I went to another circle and immediately really disliked one of the other participants. Mm-hmm. So much so that when I was sitting in the circle and everybody was presenting in themselves and he was like just chattering about, I was thinking, I will become such a bad person if I stay in the circle, because I will feel I have to reply. Yeah. What should I do? I'm here for a week. So then I left after the first session. I left that circle and I went into another room, and there was this other group, and I said, hey, I'm wondering if I could maybe be here or take part in your circle instead. And they were like, yeah. And after that, I realized that NSU is this place where it's okay not to be okay in one context and move on to the other. Mm-hmm. That it's not like you have to, put all your money in one box and then that's where you stay. And that it's important to find the context where you feel that you can contribute in a way. I think that would be one of my advices to any PhD. Don't feel pressured to just take anything they offer you, at least not after you have your position, but try to find a context where you think that you can contribute. Because in the long run, that will help you much more than just taking anything that they may offer you. But it takes a bit of courage to do that when you're a PhD, and especially when you're new. Yeah, so I found my way, I guess, like most people do. But then if you like it here, you want to come back. And most people do. It's a very special experience to be here an entire week, living together with others, having breakfast and lunch and dinner, speaking, listening to keynotes, contributing to the circle work, and then going out to have coffee and still speak. And if you like that, most people come back.
Yeah. And also for me, at least, being confronted with something that is completely new, because I actually deliberately chose a circle about things that I know very little about. I could have chosen one where I know more about, but I thought, okay, I put myself into this cold water and go into a circle that is new.
That's great.
Yeah, so that was really interesting. And I also, like the first day, to be honest, I didn't say almost anything.
Yeah.
But then I could feel like, okay, there is actually ways in which I can contribute through what I know. It's just different.
Yeah.
From maybe what other people have studied and stuff. So I can find my way. Like I'm with sociologists and political scientists and philosophers, and I'm the engineer.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, what can I say here? But now I found my niche, and it's really nice because I really get new perspectives on what I think. Or how I think, on how I see academia or problems.
I think with a bit of experience in the university, if you look at the kind of multidisciplinary collaborations that are often happening within a university, of course not always, some can be really successful, but most of them are failures, I'd say. And they are failures because people who are there are kind of pressed to be there together, or they try to collaborate, but natural science collaborating with humanities isn't easy.
Yeah.
Like it takes a lot of preparatory work to be able to do something for real, where it's not just that like natural science resolves on something and then humanities kind of do the cultural fluff around or something like that. That often happens. And I think that if you really want to be thinking about real issues and resolving them sorry, my Swedish, and together, then there needs to be time to do the preparatory work of clearing the language you use, of listening to each other, trying to find a common acceptable way of expressing the problem, almost like making a common map. Or I have this like hobby interest in mathematics. So I think there's a French pretty young female mathematician, and she's been suggesting that in order to calculate within different mathematical systems, you have to extrapolate functions or like minimal expressions that you can then transfer into other mathematical orders, let's say. And she has she has a kind of philosophical discussion about what that means, if it's possible, and what it means. And I think that looking at these these conversations in the archive material that I've been looking at that were successful and that really managed to speak together on a problem or to resolve on a problem together, that this is really what they did. They kind of extrapolated from their very defined and, refined disciplinary language, some minimal amount that they could somehow agree on.
Yeah, common denominator.
Yeah, common denominator that they could then develop again together. So that they, from this common denominator, folded out concepts that were new, or that could somehow, or often models. Could it be like this, or can it be like this? So a kind of model thinking that arose from this common denominator. And I think one thing you really see is that you need a real problem to resolve. And then you need time and will to do this work of finding the common denominator in the languages with which it is possible to describe that problem, let's say. And after that, take the third step, which is to fold out new concepts or new models from that. And it sounds really mathematical, or it sounds like a language of natural science, but it need not be, because models are, tools for philosophy as well.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And also for different kinds of humanities. So I don't mean it in a purely mathematical sense. I mean it philosophically as well.
I was just wondering if you have an example of something that came out of summer university discussions.
Oh, yeah. So I have from my some very particular things, and then I have I can answer in two ways. So in the first way, in my research, I've shown that, for example, my postdoc was on a collaboration between Erwin Schrödinger, the quantum physicist, and not physicist, quantum physics, and a man called Xavier Zubiri. He was a Spanish theologian. And he traveled to the Max Planck seminar in Berlin, the laboratory, to work with Einstein and Schrödinger. And he went there in 1930. And he worked for a year in their laboratory together with them. They've been looking at the transcripts of not everything they did, but because they are lost, but parts of what they did. They were working with optics and with the problem of observation, like what happens when we observe and how can it be that when we observe, we seem to affect on quantum level the things that we are seeing.
Yeah.
And Zubiri contributed by translating that into a discussion on like limit conditions and the concept of the eternal in theology. Yeah. and I mean, that's the issue of how to understand God as eternal and present or non-present, and how if you can observe God or not, and in what way the individual relates to the object of its study in theology are like long-standing debates since the Middle Ages. So at this point, quantum physics was a new science, and theology was the old and established science who had a long-standing debate on similar issues. Particularly this idea of the relation between the individual that thinks about God and God. Like, what is that relation? And do they affect each other? So it could be directly translated into what was happening in the quantum physical world. And that is also what they did. And then Zubiri, he was battered down actually by SA Corps. So he left Germany, and Schrödinger was forced out of the universities in 1933. So he also left Germany. And then he was looking for an employment, and he was really keen to go to Spain, because in Spain there was a Republican government at that time. And they were, seemed to be the most modern in Europe at the time. They even learned Spanish, or tried to learn Spanish, to be able to have an employment in Spain. And he came to the Summer University, and Einstein came to the Summer University twice in Santander to give lectures. And Schrödinger, he couldn't speak Spanish enough, so I have also found archive material where Zubiri is actually writing his lectures, but based on notes that Schrödinger sends him. And in these lectures, in 1934, Zubiri also holds his own lectures, and he introduces the notion of a fundamental relationality or entanglement. And in 1935, both Einstein and Schrödinger publishes papers on quantum physical concept of entanglement. So I'm not saying that it started with Zubiri, but most likely the concept or notion of entanglement and the kind of philosophical problem that it was only a thought experiment when it was published in 1935, that came directly from their discussions in this Summer University. That's a very particular result. And then that was, of course, not proven until much later in the 70s when they started doing experiments, and now it's maybe one of the most important discoveries of this century. But it started in debates between theologians but it at least blossomed in these debates about between theologians and physics, using this kind of tool. I can see that in the archive material because I have lectures from both sides, let's say, and their correspondence.
Do you think that was intentional?
What do you mean?
Like that they had this in mind? Okay, we need someone who is outside of physics to help us with this.
It was intentional. And it wasn't only intentional for Schrödinger and Einstein. It should be said, though, that Zubiri had also studied mathematics, so he also knew mathematics, maybe not to the extent. Well, actually, Einstein wasn't very good at mathematics either, but he always had his calculator. I mean, a person who did his calculations for him, but it was completely intentional. They worked in a center that also had cultural nights, and that also had this kind of idea that different disciplines should collaborate. And Heisenberg, he wasn't there, but he also had these ideas that the quantum physical problems couldn't be resolved within mathematics purely, even though that was the language that would have to be used eventually. Yeah. But you needed to move out of mathematics in order to pose the problems in a new way. And so several of these people had that idea at this time, a kind of culture that they were tending to, I'd say. So that's a very specific example. And then I want to answer in the second way. So if you look at Nordic Summer University, over the 74 years that it has existed since 1950, we can see that, for example, multidisciplinary environment studies started in the Nordic countries as study circles within NSU in the 1950s. Peace and conflict studies the founder of that discipline in the Nordic countries is Johan Galtung, and he had previously study circles on peace and conflict studies within NSU. Feminist studies, or gender studies, but at that time it was called feminist studies. Before it became a discipline in the universities, had study circles in the 60s and 70s in NSU. Artistic research has been present in NSU since the 1950s and only became a funded discipline in universities in the Nordic countries in the 2000s. Eastern European studies had a really strong presence in the early 80s in Nordic Summer University, where lots of exiled Russians were contributing to studying, or arguing maybe about what would happen after the fall of the Berlin Wall, before it had actually fallen, after the fall of the Soviet Union. And that was long before that kind of discipline was established in the Nordic universities. So it has a great track record. But the thing is that kind of research initiation takes time. So if you were to go to a funder and say, I want money, and they would ask, what is the output? That is not the kind of output that they are asking for. Because maybe it takes 10 years after the first circles here for it to become an established discipline. But having this long history also makes it possible to see how these developments happens. So the long historical perspective allows that. So that would be my second answer.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So if someone has a wild problem or a wild idea,
they should come here.
Yeah, they should come here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually much more difficult to have a wild idea than what one believes. We tend to think that we are so critical as to what is happening in the university and that we have like an outside position, but normally we don't. It's really difficult to produce new ideas or completely new problems. And it may be that you have to have this kind of interaction with other disciplines to really have that spark where it says, wow, actually, we haven't been doing this. I actually had such an idea lately, and it's a new idea in relation to my research field, and it came from NSU, because we now have a new circle proposal, which is called Degrowth and Exnovation, and they are mainly engineers and bioethic people and biologists and so on. They want to study how to downsize or dismantle the old technique, or technique that we no longer need, or that we have to get rid of because of climate change.
Okay.
So they want to say, rather than we only get money, they say, to develop new technique, but what happens with the rests, like the leftovers? And when I was listening to them, I just thought, well, there's actually no study that I know of within the history of ideas that studies like cases of dismantling technique. We have a huge field of studies of the development of technique, historical development, but no studies on the historic development of how to get rid of it.
Okay.
And there must be cases. There must be lots of cases, old factories that are reused, but no studies of the development of ideas of that and within history. So suddenly this short meeting with these other people from a completely different discipline just ignited a light. We have an entire field of the history of science that studies the development of science, but not the opposite, in a sense. Well, the spread of ignorance is also studied, but not this kind of practical dismantling. And that I think is, it's these kinds of ideas. I don't know if I will ever do anything with it, but I would like to. And, but these kinds of ideas can only happen when you somehow get that into that relation with something else.
Yeah, right. So not only if someone has a wild idea, also if someone is looking for a wild.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But this is really the place to explore wild ideas.
Yeah.
Or it should be that, at least.
Yeah.
And I think on a more general level, if you think about what role science should have in society, I think it should have several. One is, of course, to build or investigate useful things for the benefit of the society in which we are. Absolutely. But the other role has to be to somehow seek the truth or seek to discover new things independently of what is useful in the contemporary.
Yeah.
Not only because we don't know what would be useful in the future, but just to promote our knowledge. So we have to have this kind of speculative science that continuously promotes development of a knowledge for its own sake.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Science for its own sake, let's say.
And also the trust that knowledge itself is of value.
Yes, exactly.
Even if we cannot right away see what this will be useful for.
Yeah.
But there are so many examples of, okay, after decades, it's like, this is what we can use this for?
Exactly.
Like GPS or something?
Yeah, I think that happens, especially with this historical view, that you see that a lot. And also we have to be able to fail. Like we have to be able to experiment and fail and not come up with anything and maybe produce results that are just boring or not interesting at all in order for us to also produce these really golden nuggets of things that completely change our understanding of the world.
Yeah. I always think of Thomas Edison, who tried 10,000 times or something until he finally got the light bulb to work.
Yeah, and this goes not only for natural science, it also goes for like how we understand society, and maybe we have to present like 100 bad social theories in order to really get one that helps us understand the contemporary.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a space for that. And the current university, I think what they usually call the neoliberal university, and which I agree with, tends to value only like direct output and direct use for a very specific problem in the present. And that is really problematic, which is also why we need this tradition of the European Summer Universities and the Nordic Summer University in particular to have that space.
Yeah, right, yeah. There is no grant application saying, I don't know what this will be used for, but I think it's fun.
Yeah, exactly. And also I think when you were saying that what kind of value can it have for PhDs, I think that one really important thing is that within the universities, one of the few roles that are still pretty free, that's the PhD role. Because afterwards you have to apply for money from external funders, and so you have to have this really particular and already really well-formulated project. But for a PhD, you don't need to be that well-formulated, I'm not saying that, but you don't need to have a completely full idea already of what you're doing, and you can change. You have 4 years of relative freedom, even if it might not feel so, to explore. So I would really encourage also PhDs to come here, because you are key to doing this kind of speculative science. You have the time, which many other university employees do not.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
They have to lecture a lot, or they have to, and then there's no new ideas and no will to communicate in that kind of way. But as a PhD, you're free. So PhD, not completely free, of course, but yeah. And so you are very relevant, maybe much more so than what you think, for the development of this kind of science and for maintaining these kinds of spaces too.
Yeah. So what if someone wants to come here? Like, what do they need to do? Is there like an application process or?
Yeah, if you have an idea and it's crazy and you want to develop it, well, then we have open calls for study circles. Those calls are usually issued in autumn, maybe in October or November. And then we have a community review process. So you have to send in a proposal. It doesn't need to be long, maybe maximum 5 pages, but it needs to detail say something about the scientific background, why this is new or why this cannot be done within the normal university, why it's wide. And then it should be multidisciplinary, so you should have a list of participants that somewhat reflects this multidisciplinarity. And there's a formal requirement for you to have participants from at least 3 Nordic or Baltic countries. You have to pull the strings in your networks to find these participants. And then you have to have a plan for this, the 3 years, what you want to do. So it's basically 6 events, 3 summers and 3 winters. Yeah, and then you send it in, and then we help you. So the community review process is not like a normal peer review. It's made by the community here at NSU, and it aims to help you develop your application. In the end, we have to select some study circles, of course, but the entire process up until the last time is to improve your proposal rather than to select the entire time.
Yeah, right.
So even if you are new to writing proposals, it doesn't really matter, because we try to help. And if you have problems finding participants from different countries, if you have a good idea, we can also help you find the participants within our networks. So it's a very open process. And it can also teach you something about writing applications.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you have to come to a summer session to present your study circle proposal. And the community here, the General Assembly, votes democratically on whether or not you should be included in the activities for the next year. So we are self-organized and completely democratic. So we take no decisions outside of the General Assembly, which directs all our activities and also our budget and everything. So the people who are here are really peers in the sense that we take all scientific decisions together, which is also good.
Yeah.
You will not find that anywhere else, I think. So it's a different experience.
Yeah, that sounds, great. I hope that there will be some PhDs who are interested now and who have an idea or are just interested in what you do here, because I think it's really, really great and important. And
you should see it as an opportunity.
Yeah.
And of course, it's all voluntary work, and you will not get paid or anything. We have scholarships, but so it's not an opportunity for you to have a PhD project, for example, but it's an opportunity to develop a new idea, and it's really an opportunity to learn lots of new things and also to navigate academia. Because you have lots of people from different countries with different university backgrounds. So you will have all the different kinds of problems and possibilities in academia on your map when you leave.
Yeah, true. Also networking-wise, this is a great opportunity.
And historically, people also, their families.
Okay, so if you're looking for a partner.
Exactly.
Extra tweet.
Yes.
Sweet. Okay.
Maybe that's it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. It was great what you shared and your enthusiasm. I felt it, and I'm sure that the listeners will feel it too.
Thank you. I'm glad you invited me.
Yeah, thank you. Bye. Bye. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, that you learned something new. And I was just thinking when Karolina talked about this sanatorium in Davos and these patients of tuberculosis, I thought of a book that I read quite a while ago, but I kept it in good memory. And that was from Thomas Mann, The Magic Mountain. And that is actually, I think describing the situation in Davos very well, of those people that come there to cure their lung disease. So if you're looking for a novel, then this might be one for you. Yes. If you like today's episode, found it inspiring, then please share it with people who could also be inspired by it. If you would like to join Nordic Summer Universities, then you can find more information in the links in the blog post of this episode. Feel free to reach out to me or to Karolina, and we are happy to help you. And then I wish you a great day, a great week, and all the best with everything that you're up to. And I'm looking forward to welcoming you here again next time. And all the best. Yours, Miriam.